Hi, it's Katrina. There is a civilization that built an empire 13,000 feet up in the mountains, and it wasn't the Inca. This is Tiwanaku, a lost city high up in Bolivia that was once the most powerful religious and political capital on the planet. And when you see their incredible stonework, huge 100-ton blocks cut with laser-like precision, all without the wheel, you have to ask, who were these people? And how did they pull this off? Let's dig in. Tiwanaku. There is a lost, high-altitude city that was the spiritual heart of the Andes for nearly 500 years, and you've probably never heard of it. Welcome to Tiwanaku. Tiwanaku was a thriving capital city of a vast, influential empire built at an astounding altitude of 12,600 feet on the barren Bolivian Altiplano, featuring monumental stonework where individual blocks could weigh up to 130 tons, and it was all constructed without the wheel. The name Tiwanaku or Tiahuanaco comes from a Quechua word meaning the city of God. The name was given to the place by the Inca, but we have no idea what they called themselves. At almost 13,000 feet above sea level, you had to be in really good shape just to get up there. Tiwanaku was a huge urban center with around 20,000 people in an extremely hostile environment. The Tiwanaku civilization was tough as nails and built all kinds of strong, giant stone sites such as Puma Punku. Their cities were full of monoliths and structures made with incredibly precise engineering. Tiwanaku dominated the area around Lake Titicaca long before the Inca Empire arrived on the scene. If you want to know who really dominated the Americas, the Tiwanaku are pretty up there. The culture who built the city left no writing system behind to explain their beliefs, traditions, or politics. And still, this city managed to project influence from Bolivia into what is now Peru, Chile, and Argentina. The area around Lake Titicaca is incredibly high, arid, and cold. How did a people with no known script run a city this high, this large, and this organized? And how did they become the dominant power in an area now encompassing 4 major nations? That is the riddle that Tiwanaku left in stone. Tiwanaku originally stood near Lake Titicaca in present-day Bolivia, and it reached its peak between about 500 AD up until around the year 1000, when things started to decline and the Incas started to rise, but I will get to that in a bit. Keep in mind that Tiwanaku was both a civilization and a city. The urban core of Tiwanaku covered more than 2 square miles, laid out on a grid with an enormous population, considering this was about 1,500 years ago. Today, only a fraction of the city has been excavated. What has surfaced is pretty impressive. There are massive stone-faced earthen mounds, rectangular platforms, and sunken courts with cut stone masonry. You might know more about this civilization than you think. Do any of these large stone blocks look familiar? You may have heard of Puma Punku, a place with stones placed with such precision there is no mortar and you can't even fit a piece of paper between them. The Tiwanaku civilization moved enormous andesite and sandstone blocks weighing over 100 tons. These blocks came from quarries over 50 miles away. Moving these colossal stones and fitting them together with such microscopic precision means that this civilization was extremely advanced. As some would say, it's too advanced. They even used interlocking joints and metal cramps or staples to keep them tight, without the aid of the wheel or iron tools. It looks as if they had drilled holes with machines, then used giant metal staples to bind the rocks together instead of using mortar. How did they do it? It's impossible. They must have had help. And that's where the ancient alien theorists come in. The ancient aliens theory proposes that the mysterious and advanced construction at Tiwanaku and the neighboring site of Pumapunku in Bolivia was influenced by extraterrestrials. The stonework is just too precise. It looks like it was cut by lasers. And how would these ancient people know how to cut the rock into such heavy pieces and be able to move them so far? Plus, researchers have found some very unusual artifacts, like stone heads. The discovery of hundreds of stone heads in the subterranean temple at Tiwanaku, some with features resembling elongated skulls and what are described as alien heads, fuels speculation about extraterrestrial visitors. I mean, I could just say it was aliens and call it a day. Easiest video ever. Bye. No, just kidding. Don't go anywhere. Local legends say that the gods came down from the sky to Pumapunku, and this is where the world began. The god Viracocha rose from Lake Titicaca to create the world before coming to Tiwanaku to bring civilization. Depictions of the god Viracocha, who is shown with a beard and a mustache, are interpreted by some as suggesting a non-indigenous origin for a figure who may have brought civilization to the region. But gods work in mysterious ways. The architectural wonders of Pumapunku are often attributed to the Inca, but the truth is that they predate the Inca by a lot. Pumapunku translates into English as the door of the Puma, and some believe the Tiwanaku were able to build doors to alternate dimensions or faraway worlds. The Inca believed that Pumapunku was so magical, it must have been the very spot where the gods created the world. The enormous size of some blocks at Pumapunku, with the largest weighing around 130 tons and transported from miles away across mountain ranges, is considered an impossible feat without advanced technology. What we do know is that the Tiwanaku created these places as powerful religious centers. On the equinoxes, the sun rises directly above the center of the temple, visible and perfectly framed by stone archways. The city of Tiwanaku was surrounded by a large artificial moat, but it wasn't necessarily filled with crocodiles. The moat visually and symbolically separated the sacred core of Tiwanaku from the surrounding neighborhoods. You did not just stroll into Tiwanaku's heart, you crossed thresholds into its divine center. Researchers are convinced that Tiwanaku had a strong religion and a deeply rich mythology, but unlocking the truths of those beliefs has proven harder than they anticipated. Not to worry though, I am on the case. Long before civilization, there were rogue nomadic bands who settled in this region and domesticated llamas and alpacas, or as I like to call them, walking sweaters. And they specialized in hardy crops like tubers and quinoa. Later, these same people engineered raised field agriculture, vast planting mounds divided by water canals. By day, those canals soaked up the sun. By night, they released heat, buffering crops against the frost. It was climate controlled without electricity. Who the heck just comes up with this stuff? How did they learn how to do this? Maybe they did trial and error and found what worked. Or maybe some curious alien visitors took pity on them and showed them how to grow stuff. The food surplus from all this agricultural engineering allowed the nomads to stay put, and just like in Mesopotamia, all this food created a denser, more complex society with bigger muscles. The stage was set for a large urban development. Archaeology has revealed a city that felt busy and lived in. There were many ceremonial centers, but there were also organized neighborhoods and houses with patios in the middle. Why is all of this so important? Because it shows that Tiwanaku was alive. The city had both neighborhoods and traditional town squares where everyone in the community could hang out. This was a really clever way to keep the population friendly, focused, and religious. At the city center, ritual architecture was the name of the game. Everything went back to their religion. The Sunken Temple was likely among the earliest structures built at the heart of Tiwanaku. You descended into the temple by a south stairway into a rectangular court whose walls displayed godlike faces. The whole place was decorated in expressionless deities, crowned with elaborate headdresses, some skull-like and gaunt, others as eerie as banshees. Stone monoliths stood inside like monumental ancestors frozen mid-ritual. The whole space felt like an engineered descent into an older, deeper time. Part theater, part cosmos. The Sunken Temple was hardly the only megastructure in the Sacred Heart. Nearby rose Kalasasaya, a broad platform complex whose gates framed the horizon. Kalasasaya was like a stone calendar and a ceremonial stage in one. It was a vantage point for watching the sun's movement and for staging public religious spectacles. If the Sunken Temple drew you down into mythic origins, Kalasasaya lifted your gaze back to the sky and the gods and the stars. The point here is that Tiwanaku was both a thriving city with bustling neighborhoods and a religious Vatican of its own, with temples and even a giant mountain pyramid. The Akapana. Let's talk about the Akapana, the showstopper. This step pyramid dominated the core of Tiwanaku with 6 stone terraces. It took up an area of about 656 by 820 feet and boasted a height of over 54 feet. It dwarfed everything around it and likely concentrated both political and sacred power. Modern excavations at Akapana's northwest flank uncovered the skeletons of 21 people, some with deep cut marks made just before or shortly after death. And you know what that means, right? Human sacrifice. These 21 unfortunate people may have belonged to groups that the Tiwanaku culture conquered, or they may have been volunteers. Historians simply don't know. All they can tell us is that people were killed and buried under the Holy Pyramid, and that points to ritual sacrifice. The Akapana was a mountain remade by human hands in the form of a pyramid and then fed with human offerings, but it's hardly the most mysterious sight around. That honor goes to Puma Punku. The mystery of Puma Punku. Southwest of the core lay Puma Punku, also called the Gateway of the Puma. It was a sprawling, unfinished platform complex nearly 1,600 feet wide. Visitors ascended the west entrance through portals whose stone lintels were carved to resemble bundles of reeds. Beyond lay a narrow walled passage that led into an inner courtyard and a sunken paved patio. The experience was built on purpose, specifically to constrict movement, heighten anticipation, get your claustrophobia going, and then release you into a ceremonial space. And everywhere there was water. Water ran through like a musical score. Channels and conduits carried it from a nearby spring called Choquepacha, so that on your journey into this place, all you could hear was running water. Religious sites at Pumapunku seem to center on water sight, sound, and movement. But what did it all mean? That's the real mystery. Archaeologists can uncover these channels, the evidence of water rituals, but without context, there's no way of knowing what it was all about. Were they trying to appease the gods for a good harvest? Did it have something to do with their myths? It's hard to say. To get closer to the truth, I'd like to show you the newest temple on the archaeological radar. It was just found earlier this year. A new piece of the puzzle. In 2025, researchers announced the discovery of a terrace platform temple they named Palaspata, found about 130 miles south of Tiwanaku. Now, I know that's pretty far away. It wasn't technically part of Tiwanaku City, but it was part of the Tiwanaku civilization, and it was closely connected to the capital. Roughly the size of a city block, Palaspata wrapped interior rooms around a central courtyard and lined up with the solar equinox. Radiocarbon dates placed its most active use between 630 and 950 AD, squarely in Tiwanaku's heyday. The reason archaeologists are so interested is that Palaspata sat at the junction of 3 trade routes connecting the highlands in the north, the arid plateau in the west, and the Andean valleys in the east. In other words, Palaspata was a ritual hub parked in a strategic crossroads. It shows that Tiwanaku had immense power across the region and probably had multiple temple complexes like Palaspata acting as administrative centers throughout Bolivia. Basically, Tiwanaku had power, lots and lots of power. From its high position at the roof of the world, Tiwanaku projected power south and west across the Andes. Goods, styles, and ideas traveled along llama caravans. Allied communities joined the network and strengthened the culture as a whole. Provincial temples mirrored Tiwanaku's architectural grammar, ensuring a cohesive religious structure across the entire civilization. Tiwanaku may not have had a written language, but I guess they didn't need one. They had religion to keep their citizens together, and they had an army to fight off anyone who didn't want to play fair. Then one day, it all fell apart. The collapse. At the height of Tiwanaku's prosperity, they came crashing down. Around the year 1000, the cities of Pumapunku and Tiwanaku were abandoned, but they weren't the only ones that fell. The timing matched the fall of the Wadi culture to the northwest, and scholars have long suspected that the collapse of the two cultures was somehow connected. They think environmental change across the Andes helped unravel both civilizations. Between the years 700 and 1000, about 400,000 people suddenly abandoned Pumapunku. The most likely culprit is drought. Once there wasn't enough food, mainstream archaeologists think there was probably social upheaval, maybe the violent kind. Others suggest the people of Tiwanaku left through stargates to join other worldly beings. Sadly, there are no records of the play-by-play. I wish I could tell you exactly how this amazing civilization tore itself asunder, but I can't. They had no written language and recorded absolutely nothing that we have been able to find, so that's it. But I can tell you a few things, like that Tiwanaku did not vanish from the Andean imagination. Even after Tiwanaku was abandoned, it survived. I know it doesn't make any sense, but hear me out. Local communities kept venerating the ruins. Pilgrims journeyed from far and wide. Centuries after the civilization was gone, people still lived in the area. And those people looked to the ruins like they were built and abandoned by gods. Tiwanaku became such a mystery to the locals that when the Inca showed up, they incorporated the ruined city into their own origin story as the birthplace of all humankind. The Inca even built their own structures alongside the old ones, making sure they would become part of their identity. The city died, sure, but the idea of Tiwanaku lived on. The Inca moved in like a hermit crab, stealing some long-abandoned shell, and treated the place like the cradle of existence. The unanswered questions. Experts still have countless unanswered questions about Tiwanaku. We don't know who the people sacrificed at Akapana were, how far the city's administrative reach truly extended, or if it had outposts as far away as Brazil. Did they have local government officials, or was everything run by priests? And how did they know how to build such huge stuff? There are at least a million more questions that need to be answered, but for now, we'll just have to be patient. Tiwanaku stood where most cities would not, on a wind-scraped plateau in the clouds. It fused engineering with ceremony so tightly that the economy felt sacred, and the sacred felt practical. Tiwanaku proved you can build an empire without ink if you master stone, water, and the human need to gather, watch, and believe. The city may be quiet now, but it left the kind of silence that isn't really silent. Go to Tiwanaku right now, stand in the ruins of Pumapunku, and close your eyes. I almost guarantee you will hear the whispers of the ancients. And now for the giant perfect stones, but first I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Candy McGraw and Angelique Lane for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about incredible ancient civilizations. Pumapunku. This is a place where history and science fiction collide. At 13,000 feet above sea level, Pumapunku, part of the larger Tiwanaku archaeological site, lies in pieces. Its stones are smashed, tossed aside, stacked up, broken, chipped, and yet they might be the most interesting stones on the planet. Why? Because they look machined. They look like they came out of a modern factory and were dumped in the Andes for no reason. While Pumapunku was a ritual site where carved channels created an almost musical sound, some believe it was built by aliens as a portal to another dimension. In 1926, Austrian explorer Arthur Poznański argued that Pumapunku could date to 13,000 BC, meaning it was built during the Ice Age. Arthur really believed the structure was completed at a time when human civilization didn't even exist yet, at least not according to mainstream archaeologists. Arthur's claims were based on archaeoastronomical alignments, meaning the positions of the stars and the structure's alignment with those stars. His calculations put Pumapunku at being built 7,000 years before Stonehenge and 10,000 years before anyone asked, "What's a wheel?" Arthur's extremely controversial date is a massive point of argument between scientists, especially seeing as recent scholars using modern radiocarbon dating pinned the site at no more than 1,400 years old. That is an 11,600-year disagreement, which in academic terms is pretty much a bar fight. And just to keep things spicy, archaeologist Neil Steed threw in a 17,000-year-old solstice alignment claim, because why not? If Pumapunku had a guest book, it would read like a conspiracy subreddit with ancient astronauts, lost technology, and Atlantean survivors. Tying into that idea, some even believe the Tiwanaku culture was originally from Atlantis. And while it's easy to dismiss that as a crockpot theory, there are some bits of evidence that support the idea. Specifically, construction methods. Putting the conspiracy theories aside for a moment, the mainstream consensus says that Pumapunku was built by the Tiwanaku civilization between 700 and 1000 AD. Sadly, centuries of looting, repurposing, and amateur excavations have taken their toll. What's left of the place is a pile of astonishing fragments. Visiting Pumapunku is like finding a Ferrari disassembled and lying scattered through a field. It's clearly remarkable. clearly advanced and clearly one of a kind. But how the heck do you piece it together? The crazy thing about Pumapunku is that its stones don't make any sense. Its building blocks, the pieces that lie cracked or split or sometimes perfectly intact, were cut with extreme precision. So extreme that such precise interlocking joints, flat faces, and millimeter scale tolerances give modern stonemasons heartburn trying to replicate them. The iconic H blocks, each with up to 80 intricate surfaces, fit together with the kind of precision normally reserved for aerospace components, not pre-Columbian sandstone. This begs the question, how did they do it? Mainstream theories involve stone hammers, sand polishing, and a level of patience no modern human possesses. Alternative theories are a long string of lasers, lost Atlantean technology, acoustic levitation, and aliens with excellent taste in geometry. So, was it aliens or humans? Did they use lasers or rock tools? Most experts say it was normal people power. The builders likely used llamas to transport large blocks over land and reed boats to transport blocks across the lake. And although it would have been a challenge with some of the heavier stones, weighing up to 800 tons, it wasn't impossible. Don't underestimate humanity. We've done some pretty amazing things. Moving blocks across a lake isn't even in the top 10. To the Tiwanaku people, Pumapunku wasn't just an engineering feat, it was a holy site. Local legend says the first humans were created here by the god Viracocha, who also gave them a tutorial in moving massive rocks using only sound. Yep, Inca legend has an explanation for how those 800-ton boulders were moved. Legend says that humans were taught how to use sound to levitate heavy objects by Viracocha himself. And then there's the Sun Gate, now located at Kalasasaya but believed to have been moved from Pumapunku. No one knows if the Sun Gate is a solar calendar, a cosmic throne, or a divine movie screen. But lots of people think it may have been used as some sort of portal or stargate, maybe even by Viracocha himself. Even after learning all of this, Pumapunku's biggest mystery might still be that it was never finished. Some walls are incomplete, with blocks scattered around the site as if construction stopped abruptly one morning after coffee break. Was Pumapunku abandoned mid-project due to drought, war, earthquake, cosmic micromanagement? Whatever happened, Pumapunku remains a place where science, myth, and speculation collide. A half-finished masterpiece, laser-precise but looted, sacred but scrambled, just sitting there on the Andean plateau, daring us to make sense of it all. Tiwanaku's mystery, now with the DNA. The Tiwanaku culture of ancient Bolivia is one of the most debated in archaeological circles, largely because they left no written records behind. Think about it, an entire civilization just gone. No diaries, no royal decrees or stone tablets, nothing. But scientists may have found a way to unlock their secrets through their DNA. Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca was one of the largest pre-Columbian centers in the Andes, but it's steeped in so much mystery that even its original name is gone. Which is a shame because historically, looking at their society and architecture, Tiwanaku belongs in the same conversation as the Nile and Indus Valley civilizations. But that's where the new study comes in, led by Dr. Daniela Popovic of the Center of New Technologies at the University of Warsaw. Daniela's team analyzed 17 low-coverage genomes from the corpses of individuals who died between the years 300 and 1500 AD across the Lake Titicaca basin. They basically did a DNA sampler platter to see what sorts of connections they might find. And boy, did they find connections! The DNA revealed genetic continuity around the lake for centuries. Politics and cultural waves may have come and gone, but the local gene pool stayed the same for over 1,000 years. Regimes changed like weather, but the neighbors stayed put like potatoes that refused to budge. This is a major breakthrough in uncovering the truth of the Tiwanaku people. They were tough, and they stayed in one place. In many parts of the world, there were massive waves of immigrants from all kinds of places constantly changing the gene pool. Look at the British Isles, for example. You had the native tribes, then the Romans, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Vikings, the French. Throughout history, places change, and so do the faces. But apparently, not at Tiwanaku. The population stayed pretty much identical for the civilization's entire run, meaning no one really moved into the region or left. They were a bunch of hermits. But hold on, this is only part of the story. The DNA evidence showed that people living in the outskirts of Tiwanaku and in the local villages never changed much. But the handful of skeletons from the ceremonial heart of Tiwanaku painted a different picture. In the ceremonial hub, diversity spiked. Then you've got the people who were clustered around the ritual center, showing a mix of local ancestry and origins from farther away. Remember now, these were the elite of society. They were the top dogs, the rich aristocrats in their mansions of stone. The DNA of the richy rich showed evidence of origins in Peru and the Amazon, especially in the Amazon. It seems the ruling class were genetically connected to people who lived in the deep Amazon jungle. How does that even make sense? It's like finding a group of ancient Romans who were all secretly from China. Professor Maria Zielkowski is now saying that the Amazonian artifacts at Tiwanaku may have been luggage rather than trade items. They probably arrived with the people from the Amazon, who for whatever reason were welcomed into the highest levels of society. It's all extremely confusing, but also very fascinating. Let's check out the science behind the DNA. Getting those 17 genomes took a lot of work. Over 100 samples were entered into the machine, and fewer than a fifth yielded usable data. Even so, the team doubled the genomic data set for pre-Columbian populations in Bolivia through this study. For dating, the researchers used accelerator mass spectrometry radiocarbon, which hurls ions at high speeds for crisp age estimates. Mass spectrometry is basically a speed gun for carbon atoms. But even with all this DNA now logged and recorded, the mystery of Tiwanaku remains unsolved. The only things that scientists know now is that Amazonian people were given star treatment, and everyone else kept to their bloodlines for 1,000 years. The one question that scientists really wanted answered through the DNA study remains inconclusive. What they wanted to know was why Tiwanaku collapsed, but the explanation remains as elusive as ever. Going into this study, scientists speculated that drought was responsible for the end. The idea is that a long drought strained the engineered floodplain system, leading to its failure. Remember all that agricultural engineering, bringing lentils to the masses and growing civilization from a loose band of nomads? The very same agricultural advances that made Tiwanaku so powerful may have also been responsible for their decline. Because if they relied on their crops to feed everyone and then the crops died, where's everyone going to get their food? That's the theory, but it's never been proven. And in fact, some studies have shown that crops were still being cultivated late in the game, which could mean that food and crops had nothing to do with the fall of Tiwanaku. See, I told you it's confusing. Archaeologists and historians are out here chasing their tails, trying to come up with an explanation. And then there's this, the most baffling yet intriguing piece of evidence yet. Archaeological signs point to a social fracture within the city about 1,000 years ago. Scientists found temples that had been intentionally destroyed, but not by war. It looks like a possible rebellion. No signs of battle, but signs of public buildings being annihilated. There may have been a civil war here, a civil uprising, some kind of class war, maybe an argument between two religious factions. Again, scientists can only speculate, but the destroyed buildings do hint at social calamity. What the heck happened here? If you have any ideas, please share them with me in the comments. The Sunken Altar. What do you do when the world is ending? For one ancient civilization, the answer was to throw their most sacred treasures into a lake. Slowly but surely, modern-day archaeologists are piecing together the religion of the Tiwanaku culture, but it's a very wet and muddy business. A recent archaeological dive into Lake Titicaca, the sacred place the Inca believed that humanity was born, found the sunken remnants of a shrine. It's an ancient altar that proves beyond any doubt that Tiwanaku had their own unique religion centuries before the Inca drew their first imperial borders. The altar of Koa Reef. The finds came from Koa Reef near the island of the Sun. And by the way, Bolivia's Lake Titicaca is huge. It's basically a high-altitude inland sea that the Incas turned into a pilgrimage hub. But 1,000 years before the Inca, when the Roman Empire was already a fading memory, the Tiwanaku controlled the lake and everything in it. A research group led by anthropologist Jose Capriles of Pennsylvania State University spent 19 days mapping and excavating the reef. They used sonar and underwater 3D photogrammetry to chart the lake bed before carefully dredging sediments. It was Jacques Cousteau, but with better dating methods and fewer sweaters. The dredging worked wonders. The trays rapidly filled with puma-shaped incense burners, gold pieces, shell and stone ornaments, plus charcoal fragments embedded in the deposits. These were not lost trinkets, but rather deliberate offerings dated to around the 8th century AD, near the end of Tiwanaku's reign, which can only mean one thing. As the city declined, the population fled and disasters abounded. The people sought help from their gods. They paddled little canoes out into Lake Titicaca and dumped their valuables into the water as offerings to the gods, likely praying for the apocalypse to at least slow down a little bit. Gods and treasure. Imagine the treasure. Who knows how long the Tiwanaku people were casting relics into the lake hoping to save the world? There must be hundreds, maybe even thousands of artifacts waiting to be discovered. Archaeologists have already found lots of stuff, like a pair of gold medallions that bore a rayed face motif, an image scholars link to Tiwanaku's principal mythic figure, Viracocha. In Inca mythology, Viracocha was the creator god. He looked a lot like the Christian version of God. Big bushy beard, booming voice, knew how to command a room. In the Inca myth, it's Viracocha who built Tiwanaku and then forged the first humans and kickstarted civilization. Here's a fun little factoid for you. When the Spanish began their campaign of conversion, the biggest step was changing Viracocha to God. By making the Inca's principal deity synonymous with the Christian God, evangelization went much more smoothly. It wasn't about converting the Inca as much as it was about changing their perception of God. Thus, Viracocha became the god, and after a few generations, the old religion faded into nothing. As for the Tiwanaku, that's a little trickier. There is much debate over whether Viracocha, the Inca deity, was the same one worshipped by the Tiwanaku. Boats and llamas. Among the treasures scattered across the lake bed, scientists found anchors. And they really anchor home the fact that the treasures were dumped in the lake as offerings. The anchors imply that officials performed ceremonies from boats and dropped valuables into deep water on purpose. Not just valuables, but animals too. You already learned that the Tiwanaku performed human sacrifice, so why not sacrifice a few llamas? Amid fish, amphibian, and bird bones, likely natural to the lake's ecosystem, the team found the remains of 4 juvenile llamas. Evidence indicated that they were killed at or near the site and then dumped in the water as sacrifices. The llamas truly got the short end of the stick. A llama could be sold for cash, used as transport, or shaved to make a winter coat. Sacrificing one was like burning your life savings and your only jacket, just to hope the gods would notice you. Anthropologist Capriles has argued that koa ceremonies were orchestrated by a small elite group of men, though they may have been performed in view of a wider audience. But what were they trying to achieve? You know how when there's a murder investigation, detectives have to figure out how it happened, where it happened, the murder weapon, the murderer, the timeline, etc. But they also have to come up with a motive. It's the same thing with archaeologists and anthropologists and historians. Yes, it's a submerged altar in Tiwanaku scattered with offerings, but what was the motive? Why all the offerings? What was it for? It's the motive that people care about, but it's also the motive that's the most difficult thing to find. Thanks for watching! Hope you learned something new today. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell and let me know what civilization you'd like to hear more about next. See you soon! Bye!